everybody. This is Joanne Manister, and we are hanging out with the NSTA tonight, the National Science Teachers Association. And I'm Joanne Manister, and I'm a blogger at Scientific American and a new media specialist. You can find me all over social media. Tonight, we are going to hang out with Brendan Mullan, and he... Oops, let me go back to my script here. Brendan Mullan will be speaking at the National Science Teachers Association Conference in Richmond, Virginia. And he will be talking about his work as an astrobiologist, someone who searches for extraterrestrial life, and a topic that's important to all teachers, inspiring students and communicating with them. He thinks scientists should reach out to school children, college graduates, undergraduates, folks in the neighborhood, curious web browsers, and everyone in between. So tonight we'll be talking with National Geographic explorer Brendan Mullan about his work, and we invite you as viewers to chime in with questions. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad we could get it all together.
Yeah, it looks like we were having technical difficulties, so thank you to everybody for waiting patiently while we got those worked out. So why don't we start, first of all, with a question that's pretty straightforward. You are an astrobiologist, and I've already had people on social media asking me, what is an astrobiologist? So why don't you let us know what that is, first of all?
Well, long story short, an astrobiologist is someone who studies astrobiology. Astrobiology is basically the study of life in the universe. It's a very broad term that encompasses a wide range of fields, anywhere from biology and biochemistry to planetary science and geology to astronomy. So there's a lot of people working on a great array of different sciences, and we all call ourselves astrobiologists. Now, you may be thinking, hey, Brendan, how can you study life in the universe when there's only one place we know of where life exists? And that's Earth. Good question. Well, we like to use Earth as a kind of a bait point with which we can measure other places in the universe and kind of just go from there. So if you're a biologist or a biochemist, you use the menagerie of life that we find all around us as a springboard to work off of, to see what other kind of environments out there in the cosmos life might be hiding in. For instance, there's all sorts of forms of life that we call extremophiles on Earth, which are, by their nature, because we call them extremophiles, they are extreme. They live under extreme conditions. Not only do they live, they thrive under extreme conditions. They live in acidic lakes and deep buried beneath the ice, and in geysers, and even can survive hostile conditions approaching outer space. So astrobiologists who study that sort of thing, they take the unique forms of life that we find on Earth and use them to just kind of see, hey, we've got this other planet out there around another sun. It's pretty extreme. Could it support life? Maybe. And if you're a geologist or a planetary scientist, you work in the threshold, the meeting place of geology, of climate, of geohistory, and you study how habitable planets can form and evolve with time and might support life in other places in the universe. And if you're an astronomer, you might be involved in the hunt for those other worlds around other suns. And some other astronomers, like me, take a broader perspective on things and focus on the question of why haven't we been contacted by intelligent aliens? So, it's different strokes, basically. Different strokes for different folks. All astrobiology.
So, yeah, so it seems like I'm a biologist, and of course, if you wanted to be a biologist, you could be all sorts of biologists, right? So,
yeah, we just have a really cool prefix to our biology.
Well, and you apply it to, you might be curious how life began on Earth, and then you might be curious if there's life outside of Earth. So I would assume some astrobiologists are more astro. Maybe that's how they started and got interested in the biology part, or maybe some were biologists and then became interested in going further afield off the Earth. So what would you say you were?
Oh, I was mostly astrophysics until I discovered that astrobiology was a thing, like, you know, uh, 2 years before the completion of my PhD. And then I love astrobiologists. They're just a tremendous family of like-minded individuals who are all bound by their passion to discover if we're alone in the universe. And I was just so captivated by their enthusiasm, their exuberance, and they're just so friendly. They're just like, hey, Brendan, do you want to look for aliens? Be one of us. So I'm an astrobiologist now. Hooray!
So do you believe there is not just life, not just maybe bacteria, but maybe there's also intelligent life beyond the Earth?
Oh, well, that's, boy, that's a tough one to answer. Because in terms of, there being regular life, like some sort of extraterrestrial equivalent of some boring slime mold or something like that, I'm almost certain there is. And if you play the numbers game, we live in a galaxy, a conglomeration of hundreds of billions of stars, hundreds of billions of, maybe even trillions of planets around those stars. And even if just the tiniest fraction of those worlds are remotely habitable by the most hardiest of creatures, then we're not alone in the very, basic sense that other things are alive out there. But in terms of intelligent extraterrestrial life that you might see in the movies or on TV or reading books or something like that, that's still an unanswered and, to me, deeply disturbing question. I mean, by some accounts, like, we should have been contacted by now if they're out there. By other accounts, perhaps they've gotten billions of years of a leg up on us and therefore are just so far beyond everything that we've ever accomplished, we would be basically like ants to them. And,
they couldn't even communicate with us, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so far beyond anything that we could ever accomplish right now that there's just no point. So for all intents and purposes, we are alone because ants can't communicate with us, and we're just like, screw you, ants, die, I step on you.
Yeah, and they could be going, but
hope it doesn't go down like that.
Yeah, we were looking for other intelligent life too, someone to reach out to us, but we can't. So this means that at some level you're involved with SETI. Is this correct? And can you define SETI for our audience? Oh, wait, before you answer that, if you have a question for Brendan, first, after we talk about astrobiology, we're going to talk about how to inspire students in your classroom or just in the neighborhood. So if you want to ask that question, please ask it on Twitter, if you may, with the hashtag NSTA14, NSTA14. And we will be sure to see that question and feed it on to Brendan to answer for us tonight. So, okay, back to the SETI question. So first of all, could you define SETI, and then tell us if you are involved and to what extent?
Well, SETI is an acronym. It stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Personally, given my specific take on it, I think of it more as the search for extraterrestrial inspiration. Because to me, we're looking for our older siblings out there in the cosmos. We're looking for our inspiration. We're looking for our cosmic mentors, even. We're looking for proof that we're headed in the right direction, that it is possible to conquer space, to take over worlds, to claim a universe that looks like it should be for us. Now, the type of SETI that I do is a little bit different than what most people think. Now, when you think SETI, you mostly think of these banks of radio telescopes all pointed at the stars, right? Waiting for some, cosmic intercepted some transmission, I don't know, some alien equivalent of late night Hogan's Heroes reruns or something. I'm not going to judge. Aliens like to watch what they want to watch. But what I do is a little bit different. I work with a group of scientists, and I have to give credit where credit is due. This project is the brainchild of Jason Wright at Penn State. That's Wright with a W. You can follow him at AstroWright on Twitter. He got a grant from the Templeton Foundation to do something completely crazy. This is how I got involved. You can listen for aliens, or you can hunt for them directly. Now, imagine a really advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Yeah, picture whatever you want. No matter how advanced they are, no matter what they do, they have to obey the laws of physics. That's the game you play in our universe. And in our universe, laws of physics are, well, relatively simple in certain regards. There's this thing called thermodynamics. You have to obey thermodynamics. You can generate energy. You can transfer it around as much as you want, but the amount of energy you have is always the same. So if you're an advanced civilization that wants to use energy, you can use it, but you have to transfer it into another type of energy. So an advanced civilization that's really powerful, one that we think that we could aspire to be, they could use a lot of energy. They could use as much energy as a sun puts out, because a star puts out just a ton of free energy, right? So why not build something that would absorb the power of that star to use for their own ends? Now, thermodynamically speaking, they can't just like take all that energy and just like it disappears from the universe. It has to go somewhere. It has to get re-radiated as waste heat, as infrared radiation. Now, like think of your laptop. You know, your laptop is basically the same thing. It uses energy, electricity, and outputs all of that basically as waste heat at some point or another. And it makes your lap really hot when it does so. It makes the room really hot when it does so. So what we're looking for is we're looking for sources in the sky, distant objects that could be sources of waste heat from extraterrestrial civilizations. That's just what thermodynamics tells us. And the great thing about this is that we don't have to know what aliens are doing. Because honestly, if they're that far in advance that they can take over, you know, a sun's worth of energy, well, we're not going to understand what they're doing with it. But we do know that they obey the laws of the universe, and we can look for a very distinctive pattern of infrared waste heat that's unlike anything else that naturally occurs in the cosmos. And my group, Jason Wright, and other astronomers like Matt Povich over at, where is he at? California, I forget. I'm trying to give credit where credit's due. It's difficult sometimes. So this group, like, you know, we look for these objects in databases of these millions of infrared sources and astronomical databases, big catalogs, and you know, hopefully, maybe we'll get lucky. Who knows? Think of it like interstellar archaeology. It's kind of like that.
So what kind of tools are you using to see this infrared?
Well, we're using data from the WISE satellite. Think of it like, it's kind of like the Hubble in the sense that it's a telescope that's out in space that's circling the globe. And this telescope scanned sections of the universe all around us and came up with this big database of things that shine brightly in certain infrared wavelengths or colors. And this is a thick database of stars, because you know stars are hot, so they shine in infrared too. It's full of planetary nebulae and these endpoints of stellar evolution that are basically just stellar guts blown into space. It includes stars that are obscured by thick lanes of dust that naturally re-radiate their light into infrared waste heat, so to speak. It's full of distant galaxies of other stars. It's full of all sorts of things. But hopefully, if we're lucky, it might be full of sources that are waste heat from extraterrestrial civilizations.
And this, how closely related is all of this work to another hot topic, which is exoplanets?
Well, I mean, it's similar in that it has to do with space. I would say it's quite different because we're not looking for planets. We're looking for what we call Dyson swarms, which are these hypothetical structures that one could build around a star to absorb the power to do whatever you want. As ridiculous as it sounds, like it's something that one could actually do. We have enough mass in the solar system to disassemble and build around the sun to absorb all of its energy as much as we want it to. It sounds ridiculous, but hey, you know, to someone who lived 1,000 years ago, these new like Apple Watches and iPads and everything, like how ridiculous did those sound? So
yeah, those would be very magical to the group. And so my understanding is when they're looking at exoplanets, they might be looking for signatures that might indicate it could support life, like it might oxygen or water, you know, so specific signatures. And then you can maybe make the leap. Oh, there could be life. But then that's where you guys would come in.
Right. When you look for biosignatures, these telltale signs that something alive is down there, you're playing this game where you say, okay, there's some certain molecules in our atmosphere that wouldn't ordinarily be there unless there was life, like oxygen and certain molecules of methane, I think. This is well outside my field, so I'm just kind of stabbing at this blindly. But there are certain molecules that are basically just that don't come about in geological ways. So if you look for those in atmospheres of distant planets around distant stars, then you say, hey, that's a compelling case for life. We don't know what it is, we don't know how advanced it is, but something could be breathing down there. Cool, maybe it's ALF, who knows? But what we're looking for evidence that like something intelligent has done something of a great scale and power. Now that something could be a bunch of self-replicating robots, you know, that's kind of lame in terms of looking for life, but it's intelligent, it's artificial, it's not natural. So I mean, I would consider that to be a win. So we take a more broader definition of what's alive, and we look for like the high end of the, you know, the really the money aliens that can really do something with their time. You know, I don't like to waste my time on any like boring slime molds or anything like that. I want aliens that are going to like come down here and get punched in the face by Will Smith, basically.
So you're going for the big money there. So
go big or go home. That's the motto of the universe.
So what's the most common misconception about SETI now that, you know, you've described what it is and what you're hoping to find?
What was that?
Oh, so what is the most common misconception about SETI that you hear people spout off to? Anybody who says it?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's, to some it's a misconception, to others this is more a matter of opinion, but a lot of people think SETI is just a big waste of time, you know, and that's well, that's a matter of opinion, I suppose. I think I mean the other common opinion is that we're like in the movie Contact, where we sit with these headphones and we listen to radio signals all day, and that's definitely not true. No part of astronomy is actively looking at or listening to anything. It's all done with computers.
Okay.
And the other big misconception is that SETI and science in general is well funded. We are not. My computer is sitting in an old cardboard box right now. It's propped up so you can actually look at my face while I'm talking. And I carefully position this so you don't see all the piles of just like MacGyvered equipment and papers and things strewn about my office. It is definitely not a very high-class enterprise. I mean, science funding in the U.S., that's mere pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Funding for space science at NASA, that's like fractions of a penny on a dollar. I mean, we compare that to any other chunk of the federal pie, whether it's any other program you might think of, you know, healthcare or military or anything like that. And science is just very, very low on the list of priorities in the country. Now, you can open that into whatever political kind of debate you want, but, I mean, that's just where it is. We scrape together what we can, and we do the best of what we can.
You do. So actually, this reminds me, because there may be people who know that I do a hangout called Read Science. And I haven't talked to this author, but I have read the book, The Eerie Science by Paul Davies. Have you read that book?
No, I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't done a whole lot of reading since like.
It's not a lot of. I was going to say there's not a lot of time when you're trying to start a new career, but that I'm just going to throw this out as a recommendation. It's a really good book because you could get sort of sensationalized with the whole SETI issue, right? And aliens, and you know, there are a lot of people who talk about these things, and you think they might just be crazy, right? that, you know, they've seen things or maybe they haven't seen things. So, but this book was really balanced and really intriguing. So anyway, so you are sitting where exactly? It has something to do with what you do day to day besides looking for aliens.
Well, that gets me to my day job, and
Yes.
I'm in the second floor of the Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh. I'm learning how to pronounce that. Apparently, when you live in Pittsburgh, it's Carnegie and not Carnegie.
Oh.
Yeah. It's still a struggle. I'm a New York transplant, so it's learning how people say things here is difficult. And I'm across the way from the Buell Planetarium and upstairs in the observatory, and I direct both those things.
Okay, and so you have the opportunity to interact with the general public and with teachers all the time, I would assume. I take it you're out walking around and interacting?
Well, not as much as you might think. I direct those who do most of the interacting. They save me for special events. You know, it's like the Disney Vault. You know how they only take the really special things out for a couple years and they put them back. It's like I'm like Snow White, and I only come out for like, you know, a couple of days, and then I have to go back into meetings about other meetings. So, you know, there's fun to be had for sure. But I spend a lot of my time behind the scenes, and every once in a while I get to do some fun things. But you know, it's directory things.
Okay.
That's my really official professional response.
And so you're going to be speaking at the NSTA Richmond Conference to teachers in October. And will you be discussing SETI? Will you be discussing outreach? Why don't you cue us into some of the things that you'll be, a preview of your talk, so to speak.
Well, sure. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done with this project with Jason Wright and Matt Povich, which is really, again, this is like their project, and they were very nice to let me on board to take over the PR aspect of it, more or less. And so I'll tell a little bit about that, because this is one chapter in what I like to call the science story, and it's a long story that's stretched thousands of years in the past and hopefully will continue thousands of years into the future. And it's a story of us expanding our horizons and pushing outwards those frontiers of exploration. And this is just one chapter in all of that. And as with any story, there are those who live it, there are those who write it, and there are those who kind of do the press on it, and sometimes that's not terribly well done, and then that leads to all sorts of social confusion about the role of science in society and all sorts of broader issues about STEM education and what we should be doing with ourselves as a species, more or less. So I plan to segue into probably a brief discussion of what I would call the 21st century survival skills that kids really need to know to survive this crazy century that we have coming up for them, because it's going to be intense. We've got climate change, overpopulation, resource depletion, new diseases, our decaying infrastructure, and the only ones who are going to be able to navigate this confusing morass of horrible are going to be those who can have the STEM skills, the science thinking capabilities to do it. So that's the short version.
I really like that. I think that's really important. Because sometimes you look around and you think, well, kids these days, they're just playing video games and they're not engaging and they're not going to be people who are going to solve problems.
Right, and they're always on my lawn, like all the time.
With their video games.
With their video games and their Friendsters and their My Tweets and.
So they. So do you think that I shouldn't. I have 4 excellent kids, and my oldest is in graduate school, and he's an atmospheric scientist. So he is actually. I feel so happy. I thought I had 4 kids. That's a big carbon footprint, but I got an atmospheric scientist, and maybe he'll make it all right. Like he'll assuage my guilt over the whole thing.
You bet and you won.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. So do you think kids are excited about STEM and excited about facing these challenges, or do they just not know yet?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you package it correctly, if you sell the story right, and you make it, if you make science, the educational experience, as close to science, the actual process, as possible, then kids can accomplish anything. I mean, it's just incredible. With the things that I see at the museum here, we got an exhibit downstairs called Blue! Exclamation point. And it's basically just a room full of all sorts of blue blocks of different sizes and shapes. And the kids are just meant to build. They're meant to explore. They're meant to play. They're meant to take things down, work together, collaborate, solve problems, which really, when you think about it, that's what science is. That's what engineering is. And you should see some of the structures that they make down there. If we can channel a fraction of the effort they spend there into their future burgeoning engineering careers, then we're going to have the coolest looking buildings ever.
Well,
I mean, there's a big cultural problem now with, everyone saying the kids these days, they just want to be famous athletes and musicians and players of sports ball and all sorts of things. And yeah, I mean, that's true, but I don't know. When you work with kids, you can see how creative they are, how boundless their enthusiasm is, and they're going to be okay. We just got to make sure that they have the opportunities.
Right, and have the excellent teachers who can help them out. So how is it that you've come to the place where you are called on to help teachers? What brought you to the point of being a science communicator rather than just someone hiding in your lab? How did this come about?
Well, it's kind of funny because I feel like I'm hiding in here right now. I mean, that's a long story. I mean, the broadest overview I can give is that I've been here for almost 30 years now, and having gone through an astrophysics program and come face to face with the cosmos, you start to understand just the awe-inspiring majesty of it all, how enormous it is, how incomprehensibly vast it is, with all the myriad worlds and stars and nebulae and black holes and white dwarfs and everything. It's just all out there, and it could be all ours. And I would be so sad if we just ruined this opportunity in our fledgling, awkward puberty of a species that we're going through right now and just destroyed ourselves in this hormonal rage that we find ourselves in, and then the universe is empty once more. Like, how disappointing would that be? So that's the basic picture. From a more personal standpoint, I've had some family members who are teachers. I've had friends who are teachers. I mean, I've seen firsthand how hardworking and dedicated teachers are, and having run summer camps myself for only weeks at a time and having been completely exhausted by the end of those weeks, I'm just dumbfounded. I'm flabbergasted that teachers can do what they do for the little respect and recognition and pay that they do, because teaching is the most exhausting thing in the world. So if I can help in some small way to be a friend to teachers everywhere and to help them out either by pairing them up with an astronomer or a scientist, or providing them the inquiry-based, open experiment-driven curriculum segment that they can use to better their professional development and their students' lives, then I will do that thing. Because teachers are amazing.
They are.
Teachers, you're the best.
You know, I'm going to second that. I think teachers are amazing, and people will hear me say this all the time. My two oldest have chosen physical sciences, atmospheric sciences, and physics right now, and I give total credit to the physics teacher at the high school. He has inspired more kids to go into engineering and physics, and they may not have even considered it before they reached his classroom. So when you reach a student reaches to that point where they find a teacher that is that amazing and it inspires them, that's what we ultimately want, is that science teachers are not just pulling out worksheets and handing it to them. We want science teachers who are excited about the world and excited about sharing that with the students. I think that's what's most important. And I think that's sort of where you entered into all of this, because you entered a contest that you won. Tell us a little bit about that, because people may not know about this competition.
This was the House Land days of 2012. Oh, so long ago. Well, NASA had a science communication contest called FameLab that they worked together with the International FameLab people over in the UK. And what this was a contest where early career scientists could go up on a stage in front of other people and give just really quick 3-minute introductions, presentations about some topic of scientific import. That year was astrobiology, coincidentally. And this was a nationwide thing, and I was blown away when I won, because that was just such a life-altering threshold experience. I just remember waking up the next day and just being like, did this happen? What? Like, I feel like my life has changed. I don't know how. So that's when that got the ball rolling. And more importantly, that really reaffirmed to me that what I was doing, playing around with kids when they came in to do outreach activities in our department, running summer camps, doing planetarium shows back when I was a grad student, like, that wasn't all just trivial fun and games. That wasn't just a way to earn grants and fulfill broader impact statements or anything like that. That was like a legitimate path. That was a necessary path to take people who know science and connect them to people who are going to be the foundations of our 21st century society. That's where, I really found my calling, and that's where I've gone since.
So what did you demonstrate? Because you had such a limited amount of time. What did you demonstrate that caught their eye?
I don't know. I don't like to watch my own videos because.
Well, you had to. I understand you're supposed to demonstrate some sort of concept with just supplies you could bring on the stage. So
yeah.
you weren't talking about growing plants, I don't think, right?
No.
So you were talking about, I presume, astrobiology.
Yeah, there's a couple different things. I did one little ditty about how when Betelgeuse, the star, explodes, it's not going to be a big deal, despite what all the media says. And there was one about, it's kind of tough to explain. It's like kind of the trajectory of 3 fraternity brother photons as they were ejected in a death of a star, and along with their other frat bros hit the Earth and might have caused a mass extinction through a variety of different climate processes. And that was just basically so I could use the word broton in public. I'm not proud. 2012 was a different time. And the last one was about, has to do with this fundamental SETI problem that I really care deeply about and keeps me up at night, and that's the Fermi paradox, or why haven't we been contacted by aliens yet?
That's right. That actually is a good question, and that's exactly the kind of thing that could inspire a kid to go into science. They sat there and thought about it, like, yeah, why haven't we? We see them on TV and we see them in movies, and surely there's some out there, and that's probably the kind of thing a teacher could take a hold of in a classroom.
Exactly. It's such a perfect. It's such a perfect seed to a even just a single lesson, or a single inquiry-based activity, a single unit, or I developed a whole summer camp around it, because the great thing is that nobody knows the answer to this question. So when you pose it in front of kids, like, their answer is as good as anybody's. And since there's no real answer to it, there's no benchmarks, there are no, there's nothing that will get you an A versus the B. It's just the perfect example of open-ended inquiry that I'd love to have out there. And it's such an interesting problem too. It's the basis of it is that it only takes 100 million years to take over our cosmic neighborhood, the Milky Way galaxy. And it sounds like a long time, right? And it sounds impossible because it took us like days to get to the moon. Like, can you imagine taking 100 million years to go everywhere? But even with our technology, give or take a couple decades, like we could actually do it. We could conquer the whole galaxy, hundreds of billions of stars, if we were smart about it, in under 100 million years. Right? But the galaxy itself, our oasis in space, our home in the universe, it's had stars being formed within it, stars with habitable worlds around them formed within it for about 10 billion years or so. So it's like you're comparing the size of a tennis court to the size of like a big soccer stadium or something. You can fit dozens of the former into the latter, and any other civilization that had, a billion years head start on us should have just washed over us by now. And that we should have been conquered by some other civilization like dozens of times by now, and yet we haven't. So, like, are we the first? Is it hard to make intelligent life? Like, what's the answer? Because we should not be here. We should have been taken over by aliens.
Right. That's actually a little scary. So, here's speaking of teachers then, did you, and even from my own experience with my kids' physics teacher, did you have a teacher that was particularly inspiring? It doesn't have to be a science teacher, but I wonder if you had such an influence in your life.
Well, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of really good teachers in my life. It's interesting thinking about that question, because for all of us, it's true that we're all a product, a wacky composite of all the influencing people and their traits. So all the things that you do in your professional life, like, you can kind of trace back to someone who taught you those things, either intentionally or not. So, I mean, I can think about it. I mean, I just remember in middle school, growing up in the 90s, of course, first influence is going to be Bill Nye, the science guy, because Bill Nye, the science guy. So from him, I learned that you can be passionate, and enthusiastic, and excited about science, but not like be really silly about it, because if you're a children's entertainer, actor person, you could take the really silly side of things and just be ridiculous about it. But Bill Nye, like, he stayed respectable about all the things that he did. So, I can still I can find YouTube clips and watch those and be like, oh, 90s memories, I miss you, and zoop his pants and pause and everything. And for high school, I had one teacher, Mark Percy. I remember he was my chemistry teacher, and he had like this really sharp, dry wit about him that I really admired. And I think he's still teaching, actually. But yeah, I remember that, and that was very inspiring to me, because that was like, hey, you can be cool, and you can like just be like a normal guy who's awesome, In college, I had a professor that I worked with in some research projects, Tom Mullan, and he taught me something very important. He taught me about passion. Not like in a religious sense, but he would come into my office every day, and he'd be like, Brendan, do you have the passion? You gotta have the passion. You gotta love astronomy. Do you love it yet? It's like, you're not gonna succeed in this field unless you have passion. And at the time, I was like, oh my God, Tom, I'm just like, let me do my job, and we're getting results, calm down. But he was right all along. In life, you gotta find your passion. You gotta find that thing that drives you, and in that case, like, working for him in that one particular job is not mine. And now I know that, whatever you do in life, you got to find the thing that you're intrinsically passionate about. You can't do something that people like force you to do. You got to do something that drives you. Otherwise, your life is going to be miserable. And I mean, there's been a number of other people since then, but that's kind of the baseline, I suppose.
So, and that leads us to the fact that you have to be exposed to a lot of different things to maybe, sort of accidentally stumble upon your passion. Like, you don't know it's out there till you are exposed to something that brings that up in you. So it's a bit of an exploration, which leads me to this little bit of tidbit that it's not insignificant, that you are named a National Geographic Explorer, which is not given out to too many people. So how does that happen? And actually, I have this nifty book here, and it's a Nat Geo book, National Geographic book called Exploring Science, and it looks like it's for middle schoolers. So teachers, actually, this is a great book. It covers all different fields of science, but they actually have a section about you. And I thought, could you imagine, here you are, like, so all these middle school kids are going to pick up this book, and they're going to read about you, and they're going to learn what an astrobiologist is. And it talks about you as an astrobiologist, but also as someone who communicates science. So all these awesome pictures here. So when did the naming happen? When did you actually be called the National Geographic Explorer?
Well, about 2 years ago now. An email ended up in my spam folder. And I didn't notice it at the time because it was in my spam folder. And then a little while later, I got a phone call from Anastasia at NatGeo. And she was like, "Hi, Brendan. This is Anastasia. Check your spam folder. There's something in there for you." And it's a closed application. It's you don't apply. They just tap you on the shoulder one day, and it's like, "Surprise! You're one of us now." As cool as that, that's the best experience ever, because then we were all inducted into a class of explorers, a 2013 class of explorers, in this big, fancy symposium that was a week-long celebration of science and engineering and exploration and conservation and everything, and it was just, wow. It was a very humbling experience because you're surrounded by all these people who do such incredible work and save the universe, not even just the world. I'm pretty sure they're like saving the whole universe out there.
Well, I think so too, because I've actually met a few others just in my interviewing, and everybody's doing something very different from the other, but it's all very interesting, and they all have passion. And I'm sure that's probably one of the first things they got their checklist: passion, click, and then they go on. So now I, as a mom, and also as a scientist, and also as a teacher now, not in a high school, at the college level, but as a mom, when I would go into my students' classroom, and maybe I would go into an elementary school classroom where the teachers, you know, maybe not officially trained in science. They might be more liberal arts. I have seen teachers during their science demonstrations, if I were there, be actually intimidated by me. I'm not an intimidating person, but they're afraid they're going to get something wrong. So how does a teacher go about getting a science person maybe to interact with the classroom, to enrich the classroom, also to get over their own hesitancy to engage with science themselves? Because I think if a student senses that the teacher's unsure about science, you know, they might feel unsure. You know, you don't get your science specializations till they're, you know, high school, middle school, high school. So how would we, let's just break it down, how would we work on getting a scientist into the classroom?
From a programmatic aspect, or from a, like, how do we get ourselves comfortable with this new thing that we're not comfortable with?
Answer either one. We'll start one way and we'll go from there.
Well, from the standpoint of befriending your local scientist, you know, as a scientist, I can say, you know, we're all human beings. There's nothing super weird about us, I hope. We have hobbies. We have interests. Some of us have, like, families. We all have feelings, you know? Like, in grad school, I was office mates with powerlifters and triathletes and musicians and people who are in bands, and, you know, we're not just a bunch of crazy-looking people in white lab coats with frothing green beakers of weird liquids, you know? Like, we're people with day jobs just like you, and our day jobs are just a little different. Like, I have tremendous respect for the person who fixes my car because I have no idea how that thing works. And for me, like their career is just so far beyond anything that I understand that they might as well be the smartest person ever, which, you know, in my opinion, they basically are, because a car is just this magic box that moves. But so, you know, like I understand the impulse of kind of backing away from something that you don't necessarily have a lot of experience in or understand, but you know, we're all people. And what's more, I mean, teachers now are experts in the best practices of pedagogy, and you know that all includes all these buzzwords that we hear about you know, this inquiry-based education, open-ended, dialogic, quantitative, using evidence, collaborative, process-oriented learning, all these things. You know, this is what we're always pushing teachers to do with their classroom time. Make it more of all these words and less of the usual model of fill students up with knowledge, empty vessels. But the thing is, like all these terms, all this using quantitative reasoning and evidence and inquiry-based pedagogy and collaboration and all of that, like that's all what science is. There's no better way to learn science than by doing science. So teachers and scientists are alike in that we all use the same basic understanding of how to learn things in our lives. So, you know, we have a lot more in common than you might think. Now, in terms of the programmatic aspect of it, there's a number of programs out there that will bring scientists right to your doorstep. Now, scientists, like, there's two types of scientists, basically. There's, you know, the old scientists, you know what I'm talking about, who are just, like, really standoffish, and they're like, I want to be in my lab and do my science because I'm the most important person ever. You know, and then there's the early career scientists who are grad students and postdocs and early faculty who are trying to get, you know, their careers going, and they typically care a lot more about communicating and interacting with the public and working with kids and all that. In that group, you know, get on that group because they will be your best friend ever. I'm doing a program called Buell Academy. It's Buell because that's the name of the planetarium. But what we do is we're going to start to pair up astronomers from the different universities in Pittsburgh with local classrooms. Okay. And they're going to work together putting together inquiry-based lessons in astronomy but used in the classroom. Because, you know, teachers may not have ever had an astronomy class. That's fine. They may have never had a physics class. You know, that's fine. Like, I can't imagine teaching art or anything. Like, what do I know about that? So, you know, having an expert there not only gives you the authority and the, you know, the ease of mind to teach something that might not seem, you know, altogether that followable, but it also provides something really important, and that it shows you that scientists are a real, like, physical, tangible human being in the room, and they're not, you know, that weird, awkward science type that you see on The Big Bang Theory, which is the worst show ever, America. America, I'm watching it. So, you know, once you see a scientist, you're more apt to identify with science, the enterprise, scientists as people, and you're like, hey, I want to be like that person, a person that I didn't know existed, but I can totally be like.
So, yeah, that's really true, and I think especially the more diversity we get, the scientists who are women or people of color who are out there and getting in the classrooms as well, you know, so that kids of all types are inspired, you know, that this scientist that doesn't look just like an old man with white crazy hair, you know.
Yeah, I mean, some of us are like awkward white guys with beards, you know, but not everyone. So, got different strokes, again, different strokes.
Yeah, well, and that you're, you know, sociable. You're not just, you know, awkward and hiding in a lab. It's so important that they understand. And in fact, I loved science so much, and I loved biology. I loved human biology, and the only thing I knew what to do with that was to become a doctor, until I got to college and I actually met scientists, right? And then that was when I went, oh, you know, I knew what scientists were. You know, you read about them in books. you hear scientists do that and scientists do that, but it wasn't real. So the only thing that was real that I understood was becoming a doctor. So I actually went to college to become a physician until I started to get to know scientists and what they do, and discovered that that fit better with me. So I think it's important for kids to see scientists.
I
And,
agree.
and
Like,
part of it is, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, even on TV, it'd be good, TV and movies, to see scientists who aren't crazy, right? Because we all know what a doctor does. We all know what a lawyer does, mostly because they're in our lives, and also they're on TV represented very well. But we need scientists out there, you know, talking about science. And if it's in the classroom, that's even better.
Yeah, I worked on a podcast last year with a couple guys at Penn State, just talking about bad astronomy in movies, and we went through this whole list of terrible examples. And you're right, like if your only exposure to science is what you see in TV and movies, like that's so sad. Because I mean, if you only see CSI Miami or something, and that's what you think forensic science is like, oh man, David Caruso, not so much. Or if the only thing you know about astronomy is what you've seen on like watching Armageddon,
right? Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
science cannot be solved in 42 minutes of screen time plus commercials. You know, we don't zoom and enhance. We don't. It's like we don't scan for DNA, and we don't like, you know, tell computers to hack into things, and it's, yeah. I don't know where Hollywood gets these ideas, but they're special.
Well, they're trying to tell a story, so they'll take liberties where they can. So, so why don't we sort of start looking at? It's been almost an hour, but I do want to ask, if you were to explain the universe to kids, how old can you really start engaging with them? Or, you know, so what would you what would you tell a 5-year-old versus a 3rd grader versus a 6th grader? You know, I know that can go on for a very long time, but I mean, you go out, you look up at the night sky, and the universe is there. Hopefully, if it's not drowned out by your ambient lighting, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one good thing about the universe, in that, you know, there's nobody who understands all of it. But luckily, there's enough universe out there for everyone to get their own intellectual fill of it. So there's layers and layers of cosmos, enough for anyone. You know, for someone in middle school, that's going to be, hey, there are these planets out there. They're different than Earth. There might be there's other planets around other stars that are kind of like our sun. Some are not. For little ones, it's, hey, did you notice that day and night are kind of different? What's this other object that's bright up in the sky, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day? It's called the moon. You know, there are things out there, you know. For high schoolers, you know, that's when you get into, hey, there's this galaxy of stars. It looks different in different wavelengths or different colors of light. What do these colors of light tell us about what's going on physically? And, you know, as you get older, you start to put all the pieces together and start filling out the beginnings and ends of time, if you can think of it that way, and start to grasp at the physical implications of it all. So, I mean, there's no one person, like I said, who understands all of the universe. But as you get older with it, you kind of gloss over the really difficult things with equations, basically. And that's the thing that people don't really understand. They think like scientists are really smart because they work with equations, like really abstract mathematical concepts. No, we use those because we can't get our minds around the implications of anything else, you know? They're like understanding special and general relativity. Oh, forget it. Understanding quantum mechanics? Forget it. But writing out equations that tell you how certain laws act, how certain processes act, how certain aspects of the universe evolve with time, well, there you're shutting off your brain and letting math do its work for you. You know, like in astronomy, we deal with huge numbers all the time, millions, billions. Like, can any of us really know? Can we really imagine what a million things look like, or much less a billion things? Of course not. But when you start working with them from a more abstract angle, with math, equations, and eventually later like telling computers to do math, so you don't have to be bothered with any of that stuff, then like you don't really think about it anymore. It's just like, this is how, you know, the mathematics, the underlying language of the universe works, and we're going to play with it, and it's going to tell us something, and we're going to just try not to concentrate on all the confusing bits.
That's really interesting. This is one thing when I was introduced to physics, and it clicked at one point. I wasn't a big fan of math, but when I took physics, I went, you can really explain all these things with math. And that just made math suddenly make so much more sense. I started to enjoy it. And to know, like, oh, well, this magnification and resolution, they are not related, even though they're both, you see them both in a telescope or a microscope. But because the math of the equations that, you know, describe both of those, there's no element that crosses over, so we know they aren't related to it. So if you change the magnification, it's not going to change the resolution. So, you know, so those kind of things just made things click. It made the world understandable. And, you know, and I think that's, you know, one of the great things as you go along in studying science. Even if you aren't going to become a scientist, that you start to see we can understand the world, right? And I think that's what you want to do, is to help kids understand the world and how they can interact with it and influence it. If I'm wrong, you can correct me.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, we left them a lot of problems, and they're going to have to pick up our pieces. Sorry, kids. So I want to make sure that they're equipped to do that.
Well, if our generation could start, work on correcting certain things, seeing problems, correcting certain things, I'm sure we can inspire the next generation. Brendan, thank you so much for your time with us and for all that you do to inspire kids and to inspire teachers. And teachers, if you can make it to the Richmond Conference, the NSTA 14 Richmond Conference, October, I want to say 15th and 16th, but I could be wrong. But if you can make it and you can hear Brendan as the keynote speaker, do so. And it's the 16th to the 18th, I've been told. So if you can make it, please do. Otherwise, I bet you would be happy to answer questions via Twitter or email or whatever if people wanted to know a little bit more about what you do or how you help kids out with science, right?
You know where to find me.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we sign off?
Oh, wow. No pressure or anything. I gotta say something profound.
It doesn't have to be profound.
Well, I mean, just a big thank you to all the teachers out there, because it's you who are changing the world, making it a better place. Without you, poof, we would explode in a big ball of terrible things. So, thanks for that. And to everyone else out there, I mean, ask questions, solve problems, think like a scientist, stay curious.
That's great. Everybody in the viewing audience, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sending in your questions to Brendan. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime with future speakers from the NSTA. Brendan, say goodbye, and I'll sign us off.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Bye.